Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. This is the Finance Committee meeting on December 10th, 2024. I'm calling the meeting to order. We have a quorum, although a couple of counselors have not yet joined us. This there'll be no, this is a virtual meeting only. There'll be no in-person public access at this meeting. Members of the public may attend visually via Zoom or by phone, and the phone number is on the agenda that's published on the town website. I'm going to go around the room and make sure everyone on the committee can hear me. Bernie?
I can hear.
Andy?
Yes, I'm here.
Lost Counselor Haneke. Oh, there she is. Counselor Haneke, sorry.
Present.
Okay. Okay, so we do have a quorum. So let's get started. We'll start with public comment. If people want to provide a public comment, please raise your hand in Zoom and we will bring you in. I see there's one person on the phone. If you want to comment, please press *9 and we can get you on the phone. Okay, I don't see any hands, so I'm going to close public comment. Although the budget guidelines are next on our agenda, I thought since we have guests here, we should go through the supplemental budget, the Community Preservation Act appropriation and transfer order. Did you want to bring Shannon Bernaccia into the meeting?
I think that'd be a good idea.
That'd be fine, sure.
So Melissa, can you bring her in, please? Great. Okay, Shannon is in the meeting. So Dave, if you want to start us off, give us whatever you want to say.
Sure, happy to do that, Bob. I am thanks everybody for having us. I'm joined here, Bob Parent, and I'm also joined here. Kevin is with SLR and our central contact for project design at SLR, and happy to have them here. And yeah, what I wanted to do is quickly recap for those folks who may not have been at the town council meeting or are updated on the project very quickly. Just run through what we've been doing to move the project along, and then I know there were some questions from Monday night, and our team here this afternoon is happy to answer any questions the Finance Committee may have. Again, our focus here has not changed. It is on moving forward with option 3C, the north-south orientation for both the track and a grass field in that track, and then another field to the west of that. And I think in the Finance Committee packet, there was a memo from Bob outlining where we are with the project. There was also a detailed budget and then a more detailed concept plan or plan for the whole project. What has our focus been over the last couple of months? Well, clearly forwarding the design, working with our SLR team has been one of the central focuses, and we feel like we're in a very good place for that. Again, as I mentioned Monday night, our goal, if all goes well with this meeting and other meetings this month, is to have the project out to bid in January for what will hopefully be a construction period starting in the late spring, early summer of 2025. Another area of focus has been presentations and permitting. Bob and Kevin and myself have been to a number of meetings this fall, Design Review Board, the DAAC, the Planning Board, Conservation Commission, and also a number of meetings with the region, including the region's administration, as well as coaches and the athletic director. I'm here to say that all of those meetings went extremely well on the permitting side, and we have all of the approvals, or will shortly, once the Planning Board and the Conservation Commission does their thing, post approvals, to move forward. So we're really excited about that. And then on the funding front, we have been making presentations, as we promised we would, to our partners up in the hill towns. The town of Pelham has committed $110,000 in CPA funding that's gone through their town meeting. The town of Shutesbury has committed $136,000. That has been approved by town meeting. And then I will be up in Leverett Thursday night at their CPA meeting, where we've requested $176,000 toward the project. Again, as I've said before, that will not be, well, again, I can't presume what the CPA committee will do, but I hope they will recommend that to annual town meeting in the spring. So that's a quick recap. We're feeling very good about the design, about the budget. As you can see, it is a very detailed budget that SLR has put together, and Kevin and Bob and myself, we're all here to answer any questions you might have about the design, about permitting, funding, and I guess I'll stop there. We have spent a little time and are prepared for some of the topics that were discussed on Monday night, but also any new questions you might have here today for us. So I'll stop there. Bob or Kevin, do you want to add anything before?
Before you guys go,
Yeah.
Councilor Walker has joined us. I just want to reach out. Alicia, can you hear us?
Yes, thank you, Bob.
Okay, thank you. Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
Bob or Kevin, do you want to add anything?
I'll just take a moment, and if I can share my screen, I just wanted to bring up a document that we did forward on to the Finance Committee. Just wanted to make certain that folks have that document, and let me see if I actually, in case there's any question about what this document shows. This document is the layout plan for the entire project that SLR has developed. We requested SLR to take a look at potential portions of the project that we could eliminate if needed. Some of the eliminations aren't particularly thrilling, but we also have to live within the fiscal limitations that the towns will place upon us in terms of budget appropriation. So we asked them to come up with some thoughts and some ideas, and those thoughts and ideas are what you see here highlighted in the pink color. They're numbered in not any particular order, and that's really the comment that I want to make, is that there's a sequential numbering, but the fact that an alternate is number one doesn't mean that that's the preferred or the less favored alternative. It just happened to be the one that we numbered first. And as folks, likely understand, when you have a project like this one with a fixed budget, and a budget right now that isn't fully determined, and with a unknown construction cost, we have a good construction estimate. We've built in right now a 5% contingency in the estimate. Realistically, it's more typical to go with a 10% contingency in that estimate. If we do, the requested funding and the project estimate pretty well match each other. If bids end up coming in higher than estimated, or funding ends up coming in lower than estimated, we're going to have to take a hard look at some of these alternates. And that's really what the strategy is all about, is making certain that we can get to a point where we can award a contract within the available funding for a project that includes as much of these alternates as possible, recognizing even if we were able to implement all these alternates, it's still a pretty lean project. There are a lot of things that folks might want, whether it's a press box or a restroom facility or concession stand or other types of things, are not currently part of this project, and will likely be desired at some future date, but we had to live within the means that we had. So that's why you see what is here.
Are there any questions? Councilor Haneke?
Um, I'm gonna start with the alts questions that I have since we're showing some of the alts. The $4.67 million estimate that is in one of the documents you provided us, is that an estimate with the alts or without the alts?
That
number,
estimate
yeah.
is inclusive of all the alternates, everything you see on the plan.
Okay, so that would be the additional, it looks like 2 sprint lanes instead of just one side of sprint lanes, and then the pad and all the concrete and stuff and lighting would be
Correct.
included in that
Yeah.
4.67 million estimate?
Yeah, the
Okay,
way we'd likely structure the bid is we would have a base bid that does not include any of these alternates, and then the alternates would be added upon to the base bid, and we would implement as many of them as we can afford to implement.
I see the pad is listed as an alt. Is the actual provision of bleachers part of the alts or just the pad?
No,
No, it's
bleachers,
not.
yeah, so
Sorry, yeah.
bleachers have never been part of the project.
Right.
Councilor
And-
Haneke.
That's another item that it's a lean project right now. We made a decision to construct the infrastructure necessary so as to avoid future disturbance of the track and field. But we did not believe we would have the funding available to actually construct bleachers. So we provided for them, but we're not constructing them.
Could I just add, we know there are already bleachers there down on the fields, and for a short-term plan, those bleachers may need to be moved to this pad and we use them for a period of time until capital budgets allow, school capital budgets allow for new bleachers to be purchased.
Okay, so I guess that answers part of my question, which is the bleachers envisioned for this pad are not the typical movable metal bleachers. It's like a permanent installation more than just what we already own.
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay, and that answers my question. Okay.
Just to chime in there, that pad could accommodate what we call an angle frame, which is a permanent set of bleachers in rather large capacity, but it also is designed to accommodate what's bigger than what you currently have. Semi-portable, I would say. They usually don't move once they're placed, but usually those size bleachers can be designed up to 50 seats per bleacher structure, and that pad can at least accommodate 2 of those.
Thanks.
Could I just clarify one other thing based on the earlier question? You asked about does the $4.67 million budget inclusive of all of these? The 4.47 is inclusive of all of these. The difference is the contingency, whether it's a 5% or 10%, but I just want to make sure everybody on the call understands that. We feel like it's more prudent to have a 10% contingency, if at all possible, going into this. And if bids come in low, great. But if not, we want to have as much room to move in there as possible.
And the practice is typically once you have bids in hand, then if you have the ability to reduce the contingency, you do. But the contingency right now covers 2 different things. 1, the uncertainty in the bid price, and 2, the uncertainty in the actual construction project itself, that you always want to have a contingency going to construction.
And Bob, the other point I wanted to make carrying over from Monday night is I think that kind of emphasizes the importance of Leverett's commitment to the project. We need the $176,000. It is not an extra. It is not a add-on. We are going to make the strongest case possible to Leverett, that they contribute to this project as the other 3 towns have. So I will be making the strongest case I can on Thursday night. And hopefully that will get recommended to Leverett annual town meeting.
Ernie?
Yeah, thank you for your diligence in preparing this budget and looking at the alternatives, and also maybe providing some opportunities for some kindly business or organization to donate or have dedicated in their behalf bleachers or snack bar or something like that. So that works. I did have a question about Leverett. it's really two parts for them. And Dave, I know you can be, persuasive, and I welcome that. Assuming that the CPA committee says okay on the 12th, when is the Springtown meeting, and how might that impact your ability to contract for this project?
I'm gonna defer to Bob and Kevin a little bit on the second part of the question. I honestly don't know the date of the Springtown meeting, the annual town meeting at this point, but I just haven't focused in on that yet, Bernie. In terms of the impact related to alts, Bob, could you speak to
Certainly.
that?
What our plan is right now is to specify in the bidding documents that contractors are to hold all the bid alternate prices up to the point of actually starting construction. Because the reality is we're going to have to execute a contract with the contractor with the funding that we have available. We may not have that additional funding in hand at the point that we execute the contract. So we would then execute a change order to include the additional work for the agreed upon bid price that will specify the contractor has to hold to allow us to do that post leverage decision.
Okay, good. So you've covered it. Thank you.
Councilor Hannicky?
That kind of covered part of my question about the timeline, which is, which also goes to the questions I had on Monday night about CPA money and not being able to supplant other monies and stuff like that. When is a bid? What's the timeline for planning on going out to bid and signing a contract, adding the alts in terms of non-supplanting laws for CPA, or making an argument to lever it if the bids come back and with all the alts, it's under 4.50 million, say, that would be with our 800,000 is where you'd be, I think. Can you even ask Leverett for money again? Or is there something that can be held? You know, I guess I'm trying to get an idea of what the non-supplant law allows, given the timing of the bidding. When do you expect bids to be back and contracts to be signed with respect to a Springtown meeting that normally happens in early May?
I can jump in and talk about the bid timing question, because that's actually a very timely question, because Shannon and I have been going back and forth today to set that timeline. So the timeline that we are planning to present to prospective bidders is to advertise for bids on January 8th. SLR has confirmed that they will have final bid documents ready in order to meet that bid deadline. We are scheduling a pre-bid conference on site for January 15th, and we are planning to be opening bids on January 29th. So that time frame has been established. I don't know, Melissa, I know you and I spoke a little bit about the supplant issue. I can jump in on that, or you can if you'd like, in terms of what that constitutes from a statutory standpoint.
Sure. So when that question came up, Councilor Hannicky, my immediate thought was that supplanting typically involves operating budgets, which are not capital, and none of this is operating. This is all a large capital project. And Bob was able to find a reference in the CPA law that referenced the supplanting in the summary. But if you dig into the detail of the law, it specifically talks about operating. So I don't think that this would be considered supplanting. It would just be like we would have more authorized for the project than the project costs, similar to any other capital project. And I think that we discussed it internally, and the most logical way of, because I believe this came up, was that if there was excess funding available, that would be not borrowed for, because that's how we handle most other projects. And additionally, the borrowed money, because it's part of the region's agreement, would be distributed among the communities proportionally based on the way we allocated the project. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think that was the other one, which is if there's excess,
Mhm.
what monies get spent first versus last. And I think you just said, what I understood you just saying is the debt authorization, while at 1.5 million, might only be taken out for 1.3 million then, instead of the full 1.5 at that point.
Right, and since that assessment, the assessment for the debt comes back to the towns proportionally, that's the most fair way to distribute the savings back to all the invested parties.
I have one other question, if no
Sure.
one else does, Bob.
Go ahead.
This was the one I asked on Monday night that isn't necessarily the best worded question, and is a little kind of picky, I would say, which is, this is a regional school committee project that had been being shepherded through by regional school committee, well, by regional school employees, that I understand why Dave and Bob Parent, you guys took this on. I appreciate it, and I don't want this question to sound like I don't appreciate it, but and I am absolutely thrilled to see this project going forward, but your time is very precious. Your time is paid for by the town of Amherst. I know Dave in particular has almost no extra time, so this must be taking away from other projects. Who is paying for your time, and is that some time that can go into the cost of the project that would then get paid ultimately by all funders of the project? Or is this a cost that is being solely borne by the town of Amherst, the cost of Dave and Bob's time?
Thank you for the question again, Councilor Haneke. I'm smiling here a little bit, but I think my answer is similar to what it was Monday, but I think the short answer is that for my time and Bob's time, right now, our time is being being paid for by the town of Amherst. I think as we move forward, and even during the design phase, but certainly during the construction phase, more of the cost related to accounting and the payment of vendors and things like that will shift over to the schools. Clearly, Melissa will be involved with Holly and others in our accounting team. But Shannon and her team on the school side will be taking more of that burden over as we move toward construction. Having Bob on the project team, looking out for both the school's interest and the town interest, is just a tremendous benefit as we move through this project over the next 12 to 18 months. So I think the short answer is, this is the Amherst is invested almost any way you look at it. The town of Amherst, whether it's CPA dollars or total dollars for the project, we're invested at 80%. So 80 plus or minus percent. So we have a huge investment in this project being the best possible project for the region. And I think right now, as the schools go through with our new superintendent and her team, we are trying to work together as best we can to shepherd this through. So right now, Bob and I are working to make that happen. So there is no indication from the town manager that there will be a cost accounting of our time. And we just want to make sure we get the best project for the community. So that's how we're looking at it. Bob and I are both busy, but we thrive on that as well. We like to be busy, and this is, just an essential project for the community. So that's what I have today.
Thank you. Bernie?
2 points. One, Dave and Bob's and Melissa's others involvement here is goodwill. And I think it needs to be acknowledged, and I thank Councilor Haneke for pointing it out, because the next time somebody says Amherst doesn't do enough to support the schools, here's some goodwill. And there's also plenty of appropriations in this project that will go towards that. So again, thank you. And I just want to mention that in terms of interpreting the CPA, the Department of Revenue basically defaults to town attorney for any interpretations of what's allowable under the CPA. So it's good that you can search through. It's easier to call counsel. So thank you.
Thanks. Councilor Haneke?
Yeah, thank you. Just a follow up. A couple meetings ago, I asked the town manager his take on the status of MOU, MOA, I don't know what we're calling it at this point, negotiations between the town and the school district, the regional school district, because in a regional school committee meeting, the superintendent had talked about currently in process of negotiating memorandums of, I don't know whether it's understanding or agreement, regarding the use of facilities and other things between the town and the region for various things. Since I'm not in the negotiations, I don't know exactly what, but shared services, or, you know, DPW's time for maintenance of school property, or plowing of school property, or I don't know what all's going into it. The recreation department's use of the middle school, but also of the pool, things like that, things that had not previously been written down in an agreement. And so I guess, is there any thought to putting things like these goodwill, time of staff and all into those agreements as those agreements get negotiated, or recognition of your time and your help shepherding projects like this through not just Amherst's permitting process, but the CPA committees of the 3 other towns too, and things like that.
I'll jump in on that, and perhaps Melissa might want to speak to it as well, because I know she's been involved. So absolutely, there are ongoing discussions between the town and the region on a number of levels, and you mentioned a number of them, Councilor Haneke. So those conversations are ongoing, and we do need to press those forward, and I'm sure the superintendent and her staff are very aware of the myriad of things that we collaborate on with the region, and some of those services that we provide, whether it's, you know, and you listed some of them, whether it's DPW services and things like this, et cetera, et cetera. We know on this project specifically, we will have a CPA contract with the schools that will outline the funding and some of the funding mechanisms, and our, you know, Melissa's staff will kind of help us shepherd that through the process. I do think one of the big essential items moving forward with the track and field will be the maintenance of the field, and I think that came up on Monday night. Again, I think I said Monday, and it hasn't changed. Excuse me, was that last week? I'm losing track. Was that last Monday? Anyway, the last meeting, nothing has changed in that period. However, we are working with SLR to come up with some alternative approaches to that, i.e., you know, asking questions of our superintendent of public works. Does the tree and grounds division have the capacity to maintain this field? Do the schools have the capacity to maintain these 2 new fields? And I think those are going to be really important and hard questions to ask of the 2 organizations. I know that SLR, Kevin and his team have worked with a number of communities looking at basically outsourcing the maintenance of high level quality fields like the ones we're going to create here in Amherst, And I think that's a very viable option that I think the schools are going to need to look at. And I don't know if Kevin wants to say a little bit more about that. There is, I believe, a project in Long Meadow, Bear
Wolf
Swamp
Swamp.
Fields. Yeah, Wolf Swamp.
Wolf Swamp Fields. Yep, that was probably constructed about 2 years ago. And the community just decided that they don't want to take on the extra effort of maintaining a much larger complex of high performance grass fields. So they went out to bid for maintenance services, which includes bi-weekly mowings, spring seasonal startup, fall seasonal shutdown, and really took it all out of their public works hands. At that time of that bid, that was about a $20,000 per acre of field cost, but it's proven successful. And again, maybe the mowing doesn't have to be done by an outside company. Maybe the community can still handle that, but the critical annual maintenance practices that could be handled elsewhere.
So I think we're going to strongly encourage the schools, working with the superintendent and in discussions with Mr. Bockelman, to really explore that, given the demands that we currently have on our DPW, or the number of acres of grass they mow and the North Common they take care of, and cemeteries and parks and trees. So that's definitely an option for us.
Yeah, when this project was first discussed, I think in this committee, I raised the issue of maintenance as well, and I suggested that maybe the booster should take on the cost of the maintenance. I don't know whether that's feasible or not. I don't know if they can raise that kind of money, but it is. I would encourage there to be an outside vendor. Because I don't think that the other aspect of this is I understand the field does have limitations in terms of being able to support athletics given rain and snow and things like that. So there are times when it's not going to be available. And I think that somebody needs to be we need to be very clear about who makes that call and what the basis for making that call would be. And so again, it's all to maintain the integrity of the field. So anyway, I do think that I would encourage some sort of outside vendor, just because I think this is going to be a highly specialized situation, and I don't think that asking our DPW to take this on is gonna. I think it's going to be beyond their capacity to do, actually. So not that they're incapable of doing it. It's just they got too much other stuff to do.
Absolutely, yeah, and we do, through working through SLR, we do have some comps that we're going to provide for the schools, and I think you're right, Bob. It's really a two-part. There's two parts to this, to the future of this field. One is the maintenance of the field, which we've been talking about, the fields plural, and two is kind of the administration. When the administration, the who's going to be the gatekeeper on these fields with inclement weather, late season play, different sport play. Different sports, as we know, have different impacts on a field, any field. But when we as a community decided to, or really as a region and a broader community, when we decided to move away from an artificial surface, that was a very significant decision that the community made, and there are implications for playability, and clearly the number of playable hours on these fields will be dramatically reduced from an artificial surface. So we need to work with the schools on who will be making that call, who will be making it on weekends, on holiday weekends, when tournaments are scheduled, regional play, et cetera, et cetera. So that is another part of our discussions on MOUs with the region. And I don't know if Melissa had anything to add on MOUs. I know you've been in most of those meetings, Melissa.
Yeah, so I was just going to say that what I've been working with the school on is to get a more global agreement, and not to have a separate agreement for every single individual space and to sort of look at it collectively about all the services that we exchange. Like there are services that they provide to the town and where we use some of their space, and in turn there are spaces that we provide to the school and support, and they do some mowing, we do some mowing. And part of the agreements that we looked at for fields, and this was before the track came into that, but the fields of the current, the football field, the softball fields, the soccer fields, all that lays out in our draft agreements that we've done so far. Who's in charge, who gets first use, who makes a call that the surface is unplayable, because that has happened already on other fields that we had where a tournament happened. Maybe it was too wet and then the field was damaged and it took several weeks to get the field so that it was usable again. And so all those things need to be considered. And what I've sort of asked the school for is, like, let's not look at each individual situation that comes up, but all of them, because they all have sort of an interconnectivity where there's things that we do and things that they do, and to understand them in their totality, I think is more helpful than trying to do one-offs, because if you look at each thing individually, one side is doing more than the other, but as a totality, I think that it's probably more of a 50-50 split, or maybe it's not, but we need to look at all of the services and all of the cooperative agreements that we have as a part of field space. Maybe is separately than room space, like inside the middle school building. We use the middle school for our stuff. We use the pool, and they service those things. So what is our overlap, and what are our rules about who's in charge and who's maintaining the calendars for those spaces, for lack of a better word. And what I would like to say is that the contract that Dave is working on now for the CPA is more about funding the agreement, and that's a funding, like a grant agreement almost, and not a ongoing support agreement. And I don't want to confuse the two, because when we do that, we run into problems where we're trying to negotiate our relationship with the region inside of a very small dollar amount of a one-time capital expenditure. So I just want to think of those two things separately. It's an important conversation to have, but I think they're two separate agreements.
Andy?
Yes, it's my understanding that the field really won't be fenced off to keep somebody from going onto the field during times when it's not being used for organized and school purposes. And if that's correct, then how are we going to secure the field from misuse or use at times that is going to be damaging to the field?
Perhaps Bob can jump in with, using the layout plan.
Or I
Good,
can
I had
speak to it, Bob.
I had to get myself
Yeah,
unmuted.
Or
So
Kevin, yeah, sure.
yeah, it's certainly Kevin. Feel free to jump in.
Yeah, so we're proposing 2 levels of fencing. Currently, the whole athletic campus is fenced off with a chain link fence that runs along Mattoon Street. But that doesn't really prevent specific use of field areas. It is an alt right now, but with the Mattoon Street improvements, we're proposing to replace that fence, add new securable gates. That is a 6-foot fence. We also have it in the design. Currently, the running track does not have a perimeter fence, which you typically see with a running track construction. Again, it's an alt that we have to consider because there is a dollar value to it. But under the ideal project, a 4-foot high securable chain link fence would go around the entire running track, securing that field. Now, obviously, it doesn't mean kids can't jump over. They will, and gates get left unlocked, but it's the typical practice on these fields. There's just, I think it's just going to have to be, having someone keep an eye on it every now and then, do our best to try to prevent that kind of use, knowing that, you're not going to catch everyone. But I think if the field's locked up and it's just been after a rain event and there's a bunch of kids running around there, that, a teacher or staff could be like, okay, this is a unauthorized use of the field and someone should probably go take care of it. So long story short, there will be some securable means, but they just don't stop everything.
And the fencing along Mattoon Street is primarily to keep vehicles and other ATVs off the property, whereas the fencing around the track itself, which is included in the $4.7 million, is to keep people out of the track area. But as Kevin indicated, it's a 4-foot fence. It's not a 8-foot high chain link fence or anything else that would physically prevent people from getting in there. Deter people versus prevent.
Yeah, because the biggest problems are going to occur when there's probably not staff around on a regular basis, weekends, after hours, vacation periods.
Andy, I think it's a great question. We are not there yet, but again, I think that's going to be part of the discussion between the town, i.e. DPW staff and the region's facility staff. We do know for proximity that Trees and Grounds is right at DPW Tree and Grounds is right across the street. They do actually have staff on 7 days a week. Again, not to be the field police, but again, this may be an arrangement and an understanding through good communication with our police department, with our crest department, that if organized play begins to materialize there, on a weekend, with 20, 30 people, that can be problematic, particularly in after weather events. But again, somebody throwing a disc or throwing a football from time to time, is not something we're going to be able to prevent. But I think it's the organized play after, rain events or rainy periods. And again, I've seen many communities that, again, it won't prevent everything, but do sign their fields. And again, it might be, if we get good communication with people who use the track, and there will be people using the track as they do now, all the time for exercise and training. We're going to have kind of a shared understanding that, particularly organized play out there, even, a weekend soccer match impromptu with 25 people is not going to be allowed under certain weather conditions. So we won't have all the answers, but there's no way to completely lock the field, either field for that matter.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, so I guess we need a motion then regarding the appropriation and borrowing authorization order. Does anyone have a motion? Mandy, Councilor Haneke?
I move that the Finance Committee recommends the council approve appropriation and borrowing authorization order FY 25-08A, an order appropriating and authorizing debt for construction of the reoriented track and field facility known as option 3C at the APRSD High School under Community Preservation Act Recreation.
I'll second that motion.
All right, second. Okay, so motion's been made and seconded. Any other comments or discussion? All right, let's have a vote then. I will start. I vote aye. Councilor Haneke?
Aye.
Andy?
Aye.
Councilor Walker?
Yes.
Bernie?
Support.
don't see Kathy. Okay, so it's unanimous for the folks that are here.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank
Thank you
you
very
all for
much.
your support on this. We appreciate it.
it's been a long, hard process, as I recall. We've been down this road for a long time, so I'm glad to see it's moving forward. And hopefully we'll have a new track and field in not too long from now.
Thanks again.
Okay, so thanks everyone. You can go back to your day jobs.
Hmm.
So the next item on the agenda is the budget guidelines. I hope everyone had a chance to read through what I sent around. I sent both the marked up version and the clean version. The only thing that, I mean, I basically found that the marked up version that Counselor Haneke had done was fine. I made some minor, just grammatical changes and changes to make, bullets more in parallel and things like that. So most of my edits were just kind of, small changes. The one question I had, or one thing that I thought, and Kathy had a comment on this, is on page 5. And if we wind up with savings on the debt exclusion for the elementary school, can we actually use that money for other purposes? And I don't think we can, and Kathy didn't think we could. I think if anything, we would need to get we'd need to get an opinion by the town attorney on that. But I think that the debt exclusion language was probably pretty straightforward, that said it was for construction of a school, and not for other purposes. So maybe, I don't know, people can discuss this. Councilor Haneke?
So yes, the debt authorization itself can only be used for school purposes. It is unclear whether something like the construction of the roundabouts would count as to that. So that's one thing where that debt exclusion, with the project coming in under bid, I see two possibilities regarding the debt authorization. The one is, does the roundabout and Northeast Street construction that we're working on redoing because the school is going in there, is that an allowable use of the debt authorization money and the debt exclusion? And if so, do we want, one question would be, if it is and it fits in there, do we want to do that? That's one thing that I see going into this. Maybe it's not worded well, but the other one to me is, we authorized $5 million use of reserves for this project. But if the project, and we still have a debt authorization up to a certain amount. And so I guess I see this question as, should we still use the 5 million in reserves, or should we max out the debt authorization we've already had before we use those reserves? And I think that's a question we should discuss, because we can use those reserves up to the we can take debt out up to the authorization for that. I believe without a mandate to use the reserves, we get to choose which order we pay for things in. And I think we should have a conversation about whether we continue to want to use reserves for a project that is coming under budget, that we've already authorized debt that might cover nearly the whole project without the use of those capital stabilization reserves that we prior authorized. So I'd like to keep this sentence in there, because that's a conversation I'd like to actually have with the manager.
Okay, Bernie?
I agree with much of what Councilor Haneke said, and my feeling is that we need to get an opinion relatively soon, either from council or town attorney or from the Department of Revenue, as to what the debt exclusion could be used for. My belief is that it's for the construction of the school and that's it. Whether we choose to claw back some of that $5 million or reduce the overall impact of the override, that's up for debate. And I would welcome that. I wasn't real happy to have the $5 million head over to the project. I don't know that in either case, either the savings on the contract or on the construction cost or the loss of the $5 million is going to have a serious impact on funding on the tax rate, but it's merits debate.
Andy?
Well, I agree that this is a topic that should be left worded in the way that we have this future discussion. The other thing that I wanted to add, to go back to, is the question of whatever we do to amend Southeast Street. The one thing that, the way that this evolved was that the elementary school building committee was making a decision about which location for the new elementary school. And one of the factors that was out there for consideration, but was not really discussed in any significant way, was the problems that would occur in trying to change Southeast Street to make it work with the school of the size and capacity that it had. We now have a proposal for one alternative that was referred to TSO. TSO is in the process, and actually on Thursday, we'll be having a presentation from the town manager and the superintendent of public works about the why they made that choice, what alternatives were considered, and to answer a number of questions that were posed by members of 3 different committees, the TSO committee of the council, Transportation Advisory Committee, and Disability Access Advisory Committee. One of the questions in there is the budget question that we're talking about, how it's anticipated that the cost of amending the roadway, which is solely being required because of the school, is how that's to be funded. And I think it would be an issue that might become significant as the discussion continues as to whether either legal counsel or Department of Revenue is willing to provide some guidance to us about what options are available, because I think that we don't know the cost, but it's going to be a fairly significant cost. It's going to, somewhere or another, it's got to be paid for. And I would argue that there is a presentation that can be made that it is something that is solely required because of the construction of a school of that size on that site, and that it is therefore an expense that's being incurred because of the construction of the school, and raise that question. So I guess I would want to leave it as an open question that the council and this committee can come back to at a later date.
Melissa?
So I just wanted to remind everyone that we haven't saved a penny yet. So there's that. And I think that we don't really know, that we don't really know if we will. I mean, I know that things look good today, but we've all seen that change pretty dramatically. So the discussion seems a little premature in my mind. And so I just want to say that. And then the way this is worded, it's sort of, to be distributed back among the municipal budgets. And I can tell you that the debt exclusion absolutely cannot work that way. I mean, it's for the, whether or not the rotaries adjacent to the school can be part of the school project. I agree with the committee here that, that's a legal question that maybe we should ask. But again, these are all project-based questions on, like, is it part of the project or is it part of, is it part of the school, overall cost of the school? And so any money that is not spent associated with the school will not be borrowed. And therefore, whatever savings, that's how the savings is passed back to the taxpayers. And I would say to your point, Councilor Haneke, like the 5 million, could we say if it's not allowable within the debt exclusion and it's allowable, as part of the project in the town's fund of the $5 million, then, maybe that's an argument that can be made, but I don't know the process to remove the funding. Like, we gave that money to the capital. So how do you vote to take it away before we've figured out if we have enough money to cover the project? Because I hate to be doom and gloom here, but costs are rising, and they look good today, and I just don't assume that they will look good a year and a half from now. And also, this is a conversation that I think we'll be having not in fiscal 26, but in fiscal 27, as far as when we'll know the total cost of the project and when it's all closed out, just given the slow start we've had so far.
Yeah, I should just point out that the last sentence in this paragraph refers to something, in my understanding is it refers to something else, which is operational savings from having only one school building instead of two school buildings, versus whether we spend the entire debt exclusion on the construction or not. So it's really two separate thoughts here. So I'm more concerned about I was more concerned about whether if we get some savings, whether we can use them for, say, the Southeast Street. I think that's something where we need to get a legal opinion on. I don't know, Councilor Haneke?
Yeah, I was going to say the same. The second and third sentences are different things. The second sentence relates to construction costs. The third sentence is the operation costs going forward after the building opens. Melissa, you make some fair points. I guess while we could always rescind the financial order, I guess, like we do with rescinding borrowing authorizations, but I'm not seeking to rescind anything right now. I guess, and taking it back to the conversation we just had about track and field, what do we do first, right? What do you spend first with the track and field? You said, well, we'd spend the CPA first and then we just borrow less. And I guess I see that second sentence as saying we should have a conversation as to whether we spend the 5 million first and borrow less, or whether we borrow up to our borrowing authority that's already been granted and then spend the 5 million. What order are we spending things in? that conversation probably should happen before money is spent. But not necessarily to the point where we would be rescinding borrowing. You know, capital unspent is capital unspent. In projects that are cash capital in the past that have come in cheaper, it ends up into some sort of unspent capital that either ends up going back into free cash with a vote, or gets reallocated during the capital JCPC process to other capital spending at some point. So I mean, there is a process. I just think we should keep open the possibility of having that conversation in case it looks like we might not need that 5 million or all of that 5 million, given the borrowing authorization we've already authorized, before we start figuring out what gets spent in what order.
Andy?
So, I mean, I basically want to just conclude it by saying that on this one, I would want to consider just creating an additional paragraph for the last sentence, and not have it be a part of the same paragraph, which will give it some distinction, because it really is an unrelated topic to the first sentence. The other thing that I just for wording purposes, it should be at the very end of that last sentence. Among municipal operations will need discussion in FY26,
I missed that.
not discussed.
Yes, I missed that.
I have other sections of the guidelines I'd like to talk about, but of course we want to stick it subject by subject.
Okay. Melissa, did you want to respond?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify that for the school building, I believe that we're actually authorized all the way up to the 99 million. So where we will have a debt rescission of some kind, and the reason for that is that we reduce that by the grant that we received from the state, from the MSBA program. So that number moves and grows with the approved amount of the school building project, right? So we have a roundabout number about what that will be, and that so any surplus in that project, the debt side, of course, cannot be reallocated. And I know you know that, but I just need to say it out loud. And then thank you for the clarification on the operating. It was confusing to me, so my apologies. And I think I had one other thing to say, but it doesn't matter now. But I just wanted to reiterate that the debt cannot be used for any other purpose, and that we will have a debt rescission of some portion at some point, because we have the MSBA offset, if nothing else.
Councilor Walker?
Thank you, Bob. And so I might need to be reminded of exactly how the motion was worded that we voted on for the 5 million from reserves to be being applied to this project. But from what I think my assumptions were, that we would be using that first, because if we're not using it at all, then it doesn't serve its intended purpose. Like the whole reason why we voted on using that to offset the impact to taxpayers. If we aren't using it on the front end, then it's not doing that. So I don't really see any other way that we could have intended on using it when we voted on it. So I think maybe a reminder of what exactly we voted on might be helpful to determine. But I also think that we are going to be, I think the assumption also was that there would be some tax credits that would replace that. And that was like the reason that I think the council favored spending the 5 million as opposed to the larger amount that I had recommended. And so again, I don't think it makes sense to assume that we would be using that after expending the full amount that was allowed for the borrowing. And so I'm not sure if we need to have a conversation as to whether or not we're going to use that money, but maybe as to what we do with the reimbursement. If that makes sense. I'm not sure if I said that as eloquently as I'm thinking it.
Yeah, Alicia, or Councilor Walker, you are correct in that we expected to get tax credits back from the geothermal system and something else, I can't remember. That would be almost 5 million or in that ballpark. But yes, we don't know what we're gonna do with that money if we do get it. Melissa? Melissa, you still have your hand up. Did you want to?
Oh, I'm sorry. I just having done a project similar to this in the past, I think that the timing of the credits is sort of at the end of the project and would be after we had done all the borrowing. So decisions about what to do with those credits, you know, if they're allowed to be put in different places, I don't remember the rules. I'll just be really honest about that. But it doesn't come before. It would be at the end. So if the plan was to, if the intent was to take the credits and use them for other capital projects because we had done this in the place, then that decision will probably be made at the end of the project and not at the beginning of the project, just because of the timing of when the credits are received.
Yes, correct. You're correct. Andy?
Yeah, no, I was just going to sort of say the same thing and also concur with Councilor Walker's recollection of that. Is I think I'd have to look back at the minutes and at the motion to be certain, but I think that at least within the Finance Committee, the discussion about not using the $5 million in the end was tied to the tax credits from the Inflation Reduction Act. I'm sorry that Councilor Shade was unable to join us today because it was really her discussion that I think drove that part of the decision. The purpose of the $5 million that was being put forward and the larger amount that was requested that was not voted was to try and do a little bit to reduce the amount of tax burden on taxpayers if we were successful in getting a yes vote on the debt exclusion. So for those reasons, you know, I think that we would need to confirm recollection by those methods that I talked about, looking at the minutes, looking at the motion, and trying to consult with our member who's absent today.
Bernie?
I would just remark that the both the savings from the tax savings from the on the $5 million that we're anticipating, the rebates and the operational savings are at least 2 years off. And if I was going to bet, I would bet neither of those materialize given the way situations are right now, both in Washington and locally. So can we, I think we should.
Can I just interrupt? Sorry, Melissa, your screen is still shared.
Yeah.
Sorry, Bernie.
That's okay. I'm looking at the large monitor here with where I can read the letter easily and ignoring the screen in front of me. But that no, my point is, I think the suggestion that we break this up into 2 paragraphs, so the operational is separate from the borrowing, and we should really move on because anything else is just speculation right now. And I'm willing to say in 2 years' time, we're not going to see the $5 million coming back, and we're not going to see operational savings.
It could be. Andy, you said you had some specific, you wanted to raise some specific questions?
Yes, I'm just going to go in order. Some of them are fairly minor, and one of them is a little bit longer, but nothing that's going to be real controversial. On page 1, in the title for the what's now executive summary, my suggestion would be, because we had some discussion about executive summary, and basically said I understood Councilor Haneke's point about wanting a checklist that you can go back and look to, and that was the purpose of the bullets. I would suggest calling it summary and not executive summary. But the other thing is that it should be summary of FY26 budget recommendations, whether it has the word executive or not. So I think those are the two things, and I'm not going to go to the mat on the question of whether using executive or not. I don't know that it really adds that much. The question on budget surpluses on page 2. Again, let's see, I'm trying to think. Trying to see what I can get to, what my note was on that one. Instead of budget surpluses, should we use the words after certification of FY25 free cash for the bullet in the middle of the second page?
So I would not.
Sure what budget surplus means.
Well, yeah, I wanted to talk about the main section in budget surpluses, so I wouldn't at this point be willing to accede to the change in this bullet point here until we've talked about the one thing I want to talk about in the main section of that, which is actually what the section 5 or whatever is titled as budget surpluses, I believe. But
Yeah.
I'd like to hear Andy's stuff going forward, and maybe we can come back to this set of bullets when we get down to talking about some stuff in this section itself.
So you want to, okay, so that's fine. It says appropriate settlement, opioid settlement funds to the opioid revolving fund. One of the things that I was curious about is whether that really is a budget surplus issue. It's really a separate issue entirely. Whether you call it a surplus or something happening after free cash, either way, it's really unrelated topic. So at least I wanted to point that out. And I think that the other thing is, I think when we get to the fuller discussion, should wait for that. I just wanted to see if there was one other thing that I wanted to raise, because I'm going to skip anything related to the section that now Councilor Haneke has said let's hold it to talk about. And I think that the So I think, yeah, everything else that I have is under that same section. So I'm gonna hold it and until we decide we're moving on to section 5 or 4.
So why don't we just go through? Does anybody have any issues with section 2 FY26 general budget guidelines?
Bob,
Yeah.
it would be helpful, I guess it's more for Melissa, if you made the changes that we've talked about as we go through. So, you know, I think Andy wanted the title of section 1 changed. If we could just make sure that that's happening as we do it. So it reads summary of FY26 budget recommendations.
Yeah, I'm capturing that. in
Oh,
my-
okay. I just thought it might be helpful for everyone on the screen to see it too, since it's
that's
not
fine.
the screen.
So
I think it was get rid of the word executive too.
yeah.
Yeah.
So it should be read summary of FY26 budget recommendations. Yep.
Actually, I did have one other thing when we get under the general budget guidelines, just a typo question. In the paragraph that starts, fiscal sustainability requires all revenues. Then you get to a point where it says address already identified, comma, structural budgeting issues. Not sure that comma really belongs.
I'd say you're right. It's on page 2, Melissa.
Yeah, I
Section
see.
2.
Yeah, I looked at that. I thought it could go either way because it's already identified and structural, but let's get rid of the comma there. So did you get that, Melissa? It's under
It's
fiscal.
the second paragraph in section 2,
It's
FY
section 2, page 2.
page 2, section 2.
Oh, okay. I
Paragraph.
wasn't far enough down.
Yeah.
That second paragraph, like the 4th line.
Right. Already identified, comma, structural.
Comma.
It's 1, 2, 3. It's the 4th line of that paragraph. There it is. You got it.
Okay.
So we're just going to get rid of that. Anything else, Sandy?
No.
Okay. Anybody have section 3 revenue projections? Any comments? Okay. Section 4 expense projections starts on page 4. Any comments on that, Melissa?
Yeah, so we had a request and in the revenue projections part where you said if the projected was above, is this where like if it's above 3.5, you want to come back to the committee? And so I just want to sort of, so because that increase is not on the overall budget, but it's on just the 4 major operating areas, that 0.5% is under $400,000 among all 4 of them. And so we wondered if we could keep that to whole percentages, and just to kind of call out that every single one of the groups is going to struggle with health insurance this year, and that the amount of the increase in health insurance alone is above 0.5% to any one of those groups. So just to comment how to say it.
Councilor Haneke?
I guess I want to make sure I'm understanding what you're saying. This second bullet point of second, we've got a bullet point of the projections show a deficit if we accept the updated revenue projections are likely to offset this. But after you update them, if there are further projected surpluses after revenue and expense projections are updated, we have two things. The first one is prioritize putting 300 some thousand into the region before figuring out the 3% year over year increases on the operating budgets. And then after that, we said essentially put it to operating budgets unless the operating budgets year over year increase would total more than 3.5%, then come to us. And you're asking unless operating budgets would total more than 4% and then come to us? Is that what I heard?
That's the ask, mostly because the school, when they did their 4 towns last time, and I can assume that they did it in 3 and 4%, like that's how they were breaking it out by a full percentage. And I did the math on what the difference would be between a 3.5 and a 4.5 increase to all 4. And you're talking about $380,000 to be divided among the 4 groups. And the increase in health insurance alone is almost 6. So, that's, but we're saying more than 4% instead of more than 3.5. It's a request.
Well, the question is, do we want to, I mean, I thought this was also, the idea of this was we would continue this in future years, that this would be an operating process or an operating issue that we would, any time that it was more than 0.5% over what we originally projected, that we should come back, the manager should come back to the council and we should discuss how to distribute that. Is that correct, Councilor Haneke? Is that the intent?
I mean, I think that was the intent, but I think the intent was there a specific dollar amount? 0.5% is something we tend to go up by 0.5% when operating budgets change, right? And so I'm not sure there was a focus as we were developing this recommendation on what the right percentage would be in that, which is why I'm trying to think about it on my own versus last year, there was a big jump and it was sort of presented to everyone as this is what we're doing before finance and the council had a chance to discuss. It was presented directly to BCG and everyone there. And I think this recommendation is an intent to say, before you just present it as this is what can be done, given the needs of the various operating departments, maybe the council wants to re-weigh in on the should that go equally to all 4. And so I guess the question is, what's the right sort of surplus size? Not that it's a surplus, right? We don't have great language to refer to this. What's the right dollar amount size where the council wants to or finance wants to rediscuss whether it should be equal distribution or not? Is it 0.5% of operating budgets, approximately 400,000, or is it approximately 800,000? Is it approximately 600,000? At what point, if there's more money than that, than a certain amount, do we as a finance committee want to recommend that we talk before they're just equally distributed again?
Holly, do you want to?
And once again, I think I mentioned this in the last meeting. If the intent is to have this become an ongoing guideline, we always start at 2.5%. We quite often can get to 3% fairly quickly. Then we would move to 3.5%. Then we would move to 4%. Like we go up by percentages. So if what you're asking us is if our original projection comes out at 2.5%, and then a couple months later we can get to 3, and then a couple months later we can get to 3.5, a couple months later we can get to 4. We have to reopen that conversation 4 times to see if we still want to go with, I mean, right now we're already at the 3%. So it's going from 3 to 3.5, but we typically start at the 2.5, then go to 3, 3.5, 4, like as far as we can go. So I just see this as being something that would, and the request didn't come from me, I'll say that, but I see this as being something that's just going to continue to slow down that process. Every time we can get to another 0.5% in our revenue projections, we're going to have to kind of stop, hold the presses, get a meeting together, and make sure that we're all still in agreement with going with our standard financial procedure, that it's equal amongst the 4 places. So if this is going to be something that's going to be something you're going to keep in your guidelines year after year after year, I just think it's something that may need just a little bit more discussion of that 0.5%, because that could literally happen, you know, and I mean, then we could get some numbers, or we could go down 0.5%. What happens if we have to go down 0.5%? We're going to come back. I mean, we're certainly going to have conversations and keep conversations open, but I personally just see this as being something that is going to kind of slow us down in this process. That's just my 2 cents.
Councilor Haneke?
So I think the goal is to have this somewhat structure, and I say structure every year, but that doesn't mean the numbers would stay, right? The 3% that we accept comes from the November financial indicators, right? If that started at 2.5%, maybe we wouldn't have a 0.5% in the second bullet point. Maybe we'd have a full percent, right? Because of where you start in November. We don't issue these guidelines until after November. So until the November projections come out, we're basing our guidelines on that. So anything before that, you're not coming to us because you come in November. To address what you said before, at 3.5%, this doesn't say at 3.5% you come to us. This says you can do 3.5% to everyone. That's our guideline. But if it ends up being 4, before you do 4, we want to check. I think that's what we're saying here. And so I guess the question is it before you do 4 or 3.75, or is it before you do 4.25 or 4.5, right? Because there was some, and it came about, I know Kathy's not here, but from sort of, I see it as sort of a compromise between a goal of some counselors potentially not wanting equal proportionate increases this year, and other counselors wanting that, and saying, can we get to a consensus on at what point do we discuss the potential for not doing equal increases? And so that's that. I read this as, at this point, that's it. If it goes beyond 3.5% at the operating budgets, not at 3.5%, right? So more like if you get to 4, which frankly would be amazing if you get above 3.5%. And maybe we do need to discuss, as I think Melissa in the last meeting said, maybe we want to add back to OPEB before we distribute to operating again, right? You know, if it goes above 3.5%. So I know it might slow the process down, but I guess the question for finance is, at what percentage, past what percentage does finance want to talk about it before it's presented as, here's the plan? And I feel like 3.5%, above 3.5%, seems like the right thing to me right now, especially since we're already saying, give 300,000 to the region first, essentially, right? You know, and so we're really looking at, if you come up with projections that are almost $1 million in positive movement more than we've got now after 366 for the region plus the 3% on the 350. The 100 and some were already down, right? Because it was a deficit budget already. And another, as Melissa said, almost 400,000. We're talking about a change in numbers of over $1 million before you'd even come back to us at this request to come talk to the finance committee, if I did my math right. Between changes in reduced expenses on the, I guess, on the miscellaneous side only, basically, and increased revenues together need to be nearly $1 million before we recommend consulting finance committee regarding how best to distribute the funds even comes into play. And that seems okay to me, personally.
Holly?
Oh, sorry, I didn't put my hand down.
Okay. Well, the way I read this is not every time we get 0.5% increase, we need, the manager has to come back to the committee. I see this as if we get more than 0.5% increase, we know that, in other words, if we had another situation where we suddenly could bounce up a full percentage point rather than 0.5 percentage point, then that's when we would want to have a discussion, right? I mean, is that correct, Counselor Haneke?
Yeah, I think in this case, that is correct. At this point, it would be if we're bouncing up more than that 0.5%, so likely 1% or more, which, as I said, maybe next year it becomes the percent that Melissa just sort of asked for, because maybe next year we don't even have the first bullet point that already takes up the first 360,000 of any changes in projections after the deficit is taken care of. Which would then bring the second bullet point closer to that 1% year-over-year increase, I think.
Well, I recommend we just leave it as is, and, I mean, I understand that I don't see this as being something that is likely to really result in slowing down the process this year, because I don't think we're gonna find that kind of money. But does anyone? I mean, Holly and Melissa, you probably don't like this, but I think we're pretty clear that if you guys go up 0.5%, and then a month goes by and you go up another 0.5%, well, maybe at that point we should talk, because now it's gone up more than 0.5%. I don't know. Councilor Haneke?
Yeah, and I guess I just want to say one other thing. I don't think I recognize the concern, Holly, about slowing down the process. I really do. But if finance is meeting every other week in the spring, and come January when we get harder numbers, as we get better numbers in January, right? This isn't something, the way it's written, it doesn't have to go to the council for a referral back to us. I see it as one conversation at one finance meeting about, oh, hey, the projections are looking like kind of like they were at BCG the other time. They're looking like they could go up to here, but you wanted to converse, should we do it this way, or is there some other option to go? I see it as being able to be completed in about one meeting, not months. So more of a check-in, is this still where we're going?
Well, unless there's a strong objection from the committee, I think we should leave it at 0.5%. Holly?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not, the way I was reading it was every time it changed by 0.5%, we would need to come back. And I was, I guess, reading a little more into it than that. So I mean, you guys can do what you like here. I was reading it a little differently.
Oh, I read it as it's only if it's an additional, something greater than 0.5%. That's the way I would, result in more than an additional 0.05%.
Melissa, can you point to it on the screen? Am I missing it?
It should be,
Page 4.
it's page 4, it's the second bullet.
Oh, it's now going to be
Now
close to
it's-
page
now it's
5.
between
It
4 and
spans
5.
4 and 5.
Yeah. No, it's the first. It's the one above that. Says,
Says second, distribute the funds proportionately to the 4 operating budgets unless the remaining funds
Right.
to be distributed would result in more than an additional 5.5% year-over-year increase to each major functional area.
okay, so I recommend we keep it as it is unless there's strong objections from the committee. Then let's move on. I don't think it's likely to be a big issue this coming year. Okay. I don't see anyone objecting. Okay, capital budget, section 5. We've already
This
talked
was
about.
where we were going to split this paragraph.
Yeah, we're going to split the
Highlighted.
paragraph.
Just a return mark before the last sentence.
Right.
And the other is the word discussed to discussion.
Right. If we it's complicated. How about instead of saying on how to allocate that savings, we say how to allocate any potential savings or something like that? Because we don't know that we're going to have any savings, really. Does that make sense to people? So it's in the paragraph above that where the one. No.
I'm wondering whether allocate's the wrong word. Facilitate a council conversation on how to, I don't know, order the authorized spending or something. Because in some sense, it's what do you spend first versus what do you spend second, given all the authorizations.
Right. Yeah, that focuses it more on the 5 million, rather than whatever we save on construction costs. Is that?
So a conversation on in what, or conversation regarding what order to spend the authorized. I don't know. I don't know how it would be worded, but
May I suggest prioritize the
Okay.
savings? Trying to think of a good word. Not prioritize. To allocate savings.
conversation regarding what methods to pay bills first. I mean, that's not a great wording either, right?
So what are you trying to accomplish here?
So this is the one where my goal, and I'm just one committee member, is to potentially have that discussion or have a conversation on, you know, I looked up the vote. The vote is a borrowing authorization of 92 million, 5 million from capital. So the goal, it doesn't talk about how much MSBA funding is supposed to be, other than up to 66%, blah, 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 of authorized whatever. I think the goal was to ensure that the borrowing debt exclusion amount would be no more than approximately 50 million instead of 55 million. My numbers might be slightly off because it's been a year and a half since we had that vote. And so I guess then it's a conversation of, if costs come in lower, and we had intended that the debt exclusion would be borrowing, say, 50 million. And then even though the town's share is 55 million, say, if costs come in lower and the town's share is no longer 55 million, it's only 50 million. Are we still borrowing the 50 million we told the taxpayers we would borrow, or are we only borrowing 45 million? That's the conversation that I guess I've been asking we have. So it's not
based on
really
that,
allocation of savings.
yeah. So based on that debt authorization, it comes off, because I think it also says to be reduced by the MSBA.
Right.
Right. So that means that means debt's last. And that the savings go to the taxpayer.
In some sense, it's not how it's listed in the order, though. It starts with debt at 92 million and then 5 million transfer from capital stabilization. And then CPA, and then borrowing for feasibility, and then appropriate and transfer for feasibility.
Fortunately, you have to also go and look at the statutory language around debt exclusion, because debt exclusion may be very specific, that you have asked the taxpayers to authorize the issuance of debt for a specific purpose, and if the specific purpose is less, then the borrowing is less.
Right. And in the vote, it says that it acknowledges the 5 million of capital already.
Right.
So it's applied.
Bernie, did you want to?
Yeah, I really think we need to get an opinion on this from an authority, whether it be that from counsel, and as Andy suggests, somebody who can not only read the black letter of the law, but somebody who's familiar with the case law around it, or the Department of Revenue. I think it's maybe we should just look to put in some sort of generic statement that any prospective savings on the construction project or operational savings in the subsequent year should be discussed with the Finance Committee and let it go with that.
So would that be a rewording of this sentence to something like, you will need to facilitate a council conversation if the project costs come in below authorized, what's
Yeah,
the
so-
title?
so-
The
so-
order authorizing the construction of a new school at Fort River and appropriation and borrowing authorization.
I would think something like that should suffice.
I'm gonna leave that for you to put in. I don't think you can. But we'll get a legal opinion, but I don't think you can. The vote was the vote.
I'm inclined to agree with that, but looking at some sort of compromise language here.
So here's my recommendation. You will need to facilitate a council conversation if, and here's the new language. If construction costs are lower than appropriation and borrowing authorization order FY 23-06C permitted.
Sure.
Okay.
And that conversation may consist of, we have to spend the money in this order.
And we have to do it in this order, right? Like,
Right,
we
so-
might not
so
have
I
a
would just be
choice.
prepared to be told that,
Yeah.
if we don't need to borrow as much, then that reverts back to the taxpayer. We have to spend our 5 million. We have to spend the state grant and then move on from there. But
Well,
to
make
have that
clear-
conversation, so it's understood by the council and the public at large that this is what happens when you save money on a project, on this particular project.
Bernie, if DOR says that, or our legal counsel say that it's a very short conversation.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, so I agree on that. Can we, Melissa, can you put that in?
I can say it again, Melissa.
So it would just, you need to delete on how to allocate that savings.
And in its place, if construction costs are lower than appropriation and borrowing authorization order, FY 23-06C. Uh, 23-06C. Permitted.
Any other?
Was it OC or 06C?
06C.
F6C.
And it's is actually a 0.
06.
Oh, sorry, 06C, yeah.
Any other questions or comments on this section? Okay, 6. Andy, you said you had some questions or issues with section 6 budget surpluses?
Should we take it in order? And because Mandy, you had some things you wanted to raise here, and I want to make sure that we get to them in a logical way. The one thing that I was going to say is that in the second paragraph, I think that it's really not clear to the reader as to what the purpose of free cash is and what the purpose of a general stabilization is. And I think that it really needs some work. Free cash is of course what is left over at the end of the year due to excesses in revenue or expending less money, and that increases free cash and adds to the free cash that's left over from the prior year, with adjustments that are then made by DOR as it certifies the free cash amount, which is the end of the process. And people use free cash for various purposes. And it's advised by DOR to have, and they actually have a directive on this. It's a one-page document I'd be glad to share with the committee. I looked at it this morning. But there are things like meeting extraordinary or unforeseen expenses that occurred during the year when it gives you the ability to deal with reductions in some revenue source that you expected. It gives you some ability to have some some cash, sort of an adequate cash flow plan, like if you're delayed in getting any revenue. So that there are various purposes for maintaining free cash. It's kind of like any of us as individuals or any business who likes to have some cash on hand that is available to use for those kinds of purposes. And the general stabilization is what you're really talking about for the rainy day. So that mushing the two together is misleading in giving the definition of that. And that was sort of the reaction I had when I read it again last night, which is what caused me to go back and look at what the DOR says about free cash. Melissa may have some thoughts about this because she is even more familiar with this territory than me or Bernie.
Councilor Haneke?
Yeah, I will agree they're kind of mushed, but I think the first sentence in that paragraph covers the mushing. For technical terms here, needed for a rainy day when there's a loss of revenue or an increase in expenses that could not be anticipated, and maybe that one should be separated out, or to pay for one-time expenses to satisfy grant time requirements. We didn't include it all. This is, while it's a document that is somewhat for the public, it's also a technical document for our experts employees in the finance departments and the manager. And so I guess I think it's okay to kind of mush it. Maybe we could pick better descriptions,
Well, then you could
reorder them.
the easiest thing to do would be to just say general stabilization reserves are needed for the rainy day, and free cash is needed for such other purposes as a loss of revenue or increase of expenses. I mean, you could divide it that way and just go on.
Okay.
And that way you sort of do both.
Mhm.
You demush it, is to use the word.
The mushing,
Very technical.
the quanta of vote is different.
Right.
Free cash and general stabilization, and I think that sets them apart and also sets a threshold for both urgency and extent. And so we've got considerable more money in the general stabilization fund than free cash. And it takes a greater effort to convince council to spend general stabilization or any stabilization fund.
Well, I think Andy's, I mean, if we want to make it a little more precise, I think Andy's edit where we start with general stabilization or reserves are needed for that rainy day, and free cash is needed when there is a loss of revenue, blah, blah, blah. Does that make sense?
Well, but free cash is more than loss of revenue.
Well, no, I mean, or increase in expenses. I mean, the rest of that sentence. In other words, I would just say, I don't know. I mean,
Can we help?
That'd be
Go ahead.
great, Melissa.
Okay, so again, I'll go back to what's your intent. So if it was me, which I know I have a different opinion than the committee, right? So I think that conservative fiscal people like myself would say that free cash and stabilization, even though they can be used for any legal purpose, should be, is the intent of the town to use them for one-time expenditures or catastrophic events. So I think I would say that. And if you want to define the legal use, let's put in a definition. Like we'll put in an appendix with a definition of terms. Do you know what I mean? Like, so what's the intent of the guidance versus what is the legal use? And don't try and mix those two. That would be my, and your intent might be different than mine. So, but what is the intent? So I would separate your intent of what you think the best use of that is from the definition of legal use, if that makes sense.
Ollie?
And I was going to simply say, is this any different from what our normal financial policy is? And do we need to even necessarily include something unless you're advising us to do something different than what we normally would be doing? So this is just a general statement about free cash and general stabilization. And if we're still going to be following our normal procedure, then I think that as it stands is our normal, and it doesn't really either, number one, need to be there or need to be changed in any way because we're still following our standard procedure, if that makes sense.
Councilor Haneke?
I guess I would be okay with eliminating the first sentence of that paragraph.
I was thinking that.
Just getting rid of the description of what they are. again, it's guidelines. And to Holly's point, we are not changing the guideline. We're trying to be more specific as to what our guidelines are for, in some sense, the public, of after free cash is certified because there were free cash is certified not because there were revenue surpluses, but if there were revenue surpluses as part of the free cash certification, here's your order of what we expect our financial orders transfers to be. So I think we solve Andy's concern by just eliminating the first sentence, and we're keeping the traditional guidance of start with making sure free cash does not go below 5% and that general stabilization is at minimum 10%, and then move on from there.
I
I
agree.
think that makes sense.
Okay.
So can I talk about
Yes.
my ones? I don't know if Andy's got next one.
Go ahead.
Andy made a good point regarding the opioid settlement funds.
Yes.
That I'd be okay deleting that paragraph because it goes into sort of one of the points I was going to make. And I don't know whether we want to change things with this. I see this section as dealing with how to propose financial orders when there are budget surpluses at the end of year closeout, not at any time there is free cash above 5%. The opioid settlement funds go into free cash by default, but they're not part of, as Andy said, budget surpluses. So maybe they don't belong in this section because that's its own sort of guidance and policy on where it goes. And what I see this section is dealing with is much more when the fiscal year ends, if there was a budget surplus, we know that ends up in free cash. And so what do you do with that? Are we guiding to just leave it all in free cash? No. We're guiding to make sure free cash is at 5%, make sure regular general stabilization is at 10%. What are we guiding those surpluses to be used for? And there's a point, we had at one point a lot of bullet points here. And a point was made that in our revenue section, the revenue projection sections, we're asking the manager and finance department to be a little less conservative, still conservative, but a little less conservative. Because if we are too conservative on revenue projections, we end up with a large surplus on the revenue side at the end of the year that, if we had been slightly less conservative, could have been spent on operating in that fiscal year and would have been distributed amongst the four major operating budgets. If those budget surpluses result from expenses being lower than budgeted, where's the recommendation on that, right? The schools have made a good point that if the elementary schools last FY24, their expenses were 50,000 below what we had budgeted for them in operating, how do they get that 50,000 back, right? But the municipal government's operating expenses were millions below what we had allocated to them and thought was a fair allocation. And so I guess my question is, when we're talking about, I added this sentence about the proposes the following guidelines for the allocation of end of year surpluses after free cash was certified. So talking about only trying to be clear, we're only talking about the budget surpluses, not other monies that might go into free cash for whatever reason that are outside of the actual budgeted numbers. But should we really be talking about the revenue side surpluses or the expense side surpluses, or both? Or do we want to make different recommendations for revenue side surpluses and expense side surpluses? I hope I made myself clear.
Did you want to say something, Holly?
Oh, yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm not going to be a popular person with this comment, but I wanted to mention something that um just kind of occurred to me in the last couple weeks. And so when we were discussing our free cash and where the free cash comes from and how the free cash is calculated and what to do with free cash, et cetera, something in the back of my mind said, what, I guess, how does the region work in their excess and deficiency? So they have a similar thing to our free cash. It's called the E&D and the regional school district. And they basically have guardrails on theirs. It cannot be in excess of 5% of their operating budget. And if it is, then they have to do refunds back to the additional towns. So I went onto the DOR's website and lo and behold, public information. There it is. So I just wanted to point out that the region has over $1 million of excess and deficiency every year for the past several years that I have looked at, including their FY24 E&D. They're similar to free cash certification, which I believe was 1.5, almost $1.6 million. So when the and this is just my personal opinion, but when the talk of sharing this money with everybody comes up and comes out, it's just a little bit disturbing to me because typically the other portions of the municipal budget do not give us back any money, do not necessarily contribute to this free cash. And on the region side, looking right now at the last 3 years, their excess and deficiency, 1.53 million, 1.3 million. And then this was, I believe, the 1 year where they actually had to give it back, where they had over a $2 million savings. And that's the last 3 fiscal years. So I just wanted to share that information with the finance committee if nobody is aware of the savings and the additional similar to our free cash that the region holds as well. It was a little shocking to me.
The E&D money is always another one of those mysteries when you're dealing with original. And you're correct. They can have in E&D up to equal to 5% of their budget. I'm wrestling with purpose behind this. I mean, it is pretty much standard practice for the town to try and hit a 5% free cash surplus. We have guidelines as to what happens to the excess beyond that, where it goes to general stabilization and so on and so on. Is it really a question that the council wants the manager to come back and discuss this, rather than simply going forward and following the guidelines? I don't feel challenged by the fact that the town has a healthy free cash account at the end of the fiscal year. I think that speaks to very careful budgeting. In addition to some accidents that occur over the course of the year that are unplanned for, whether there's staff vacancies, whether it's an increase in certain rates, when people are running out and buying new cars, there's a variety of things that can happen. So I don't feel challenged by that, because that money then can go for other one-time only or capital purchases down the road.
So I just, the truth is that based on the rules, we do come to the council with the free cash votes. Like, we have to come to you. So and those are our, so when, when Bernie said that, I was like, well, of course we are going to, because we have to.
Have to.
So, so this is, it's just so I think that if you wanted us not, that you have the opportunity in council when it's presented to you to say, nope, we don't agree with your decision to do the 5%, 10%, which is the financial policies that we're following. So.
Holly?
I just wanted to, in addition to that, just sort of remind folks, it was a very intentional, move on the town to build the capital stabilization fund, move the capital stabilization fund forward and put additional monies into it. If we didn't have free cash, we would not have money to put into there.
Mm-hmm.
And I also just wanted to very briefly, if you go up to the last paragraph on the previous page 6, there is a comment in there that I'm just not 100% clear on, where it says the very last sentence where it says not to exceed 205,000 until the town's contribution equals $2 million. I'm just not real sure where that $205,000 came from. I believe that was the first year's amount. Was that something that that was intentionally said we wouldn't put? So if we got $300,000 worth of cannabis money, which I'm sure is not going to happen, it is dwindling, but if we got more, we would only move up to the 205. Is that accurate? Because I don't
Yes, it was
recall
part
that.
of the vote. It was
Okay.
part of the vote the council took back then, that it wouldn't
Okay, I
exceed
just never heard.
205,000 a year.
Yeah, I don't think we'll reach that at this point anyways, but thank you.
Andy?
Yeah, I was looking at the document the Technical Assistance Bureau of the Department of Revenue produced that I was talking about. And again, I think what I'll do is I'll send it to Bob at the conclusion of the meeting. It's just a one-page PDF, and you can decide whether you want to distribute it to others. But there were several things about it. One is that it is the source that recommends that municipalities have a policy on how much free cash to retain. And, as part of the thinking of the Finance Committee, when it drafted the current policies and objectives that we operate with. But another sentence in there says, as a non-recurring revenue source, free cash should be restricted to paying one-time expenditures, funding capital projects, or replenishing other reserves. And then it goes on to say, if a community incorporates free cash into revenue source projections for next year's operational budgets, it's prudent to place a percentage restriction on the total free cash to be used. Overall, Technical Assistance Bureau recommends that communities adopt the free cash policy. And there was one other sentence that I thought was very helpful, and I'm trying to find it now. But I basically was saying that it should be recognized that it's a non-recurring revenue. It should be treated as such. And why don't I come back? If I find it, I'll come back to you.
Okay. And your hand is still up. Get back to Councilor Haneke.
So, yeah, I mean, I guess what I'm struggling with is we have had some large surpluses, and in past years, the manager has made recommendations without our guidance initially on what to do with those surpluses, where these paragraphs kind of follow what it is. Our guidance was there for free cash and general stabilization. Our guidance was there for reparation stabilization. But beyond that, we didn't have any guidance. And this document's trying to provide more guidance, at least after those things are met. And what is that guidance? It goes to, I guess, some of what Andy was just saying about one-time funds. And right now we've got a guidance of potentially most to capital stabilization from those surpluses, which is different than total amount of certified free cash. And maybe we need to make that clear in here. That we're talking about the end of year surpluses, not the total certified free cash here, because there can be other things like the opioid settlement that goes into that free cash that have other purposes or other uses, and might not follow this particular guidance. But should our guidance be only from the revenue side cause of surpluses, from all of the budget surplus, from, should it exclude the expense side cause of surplus? Do we want to have different recommendations for the expense side cause, that if all of the municipal lower spending, which I applaud, that our municipal departments don't spend money they don't need and send it essentially to free cash at the end of the year. I want to continue urging that and applauding that. But should all of that then go into capital stabilization, or should that go into municipal capital spending, like Paul had been recommending for roads and sidewalks, for example, outside of the JCPC process? Should any returned funds from the elementary school budget go back to the elementary school somehow? I guess it's that last paragraph before enterprise funds that I thought maybe we should be more clear on what parts of the budget surplus apply it to, and whether we want different things, different parts of that surplus to go different places.
And I had drafted actually earlier today, in addition to that paragraph that you're talking about, where it ends available free cash spending through the JCPC process, we're adding the following: or to address needs for FY26 not identified when JCPC made its recommendations and the CIP was developed, and to address goals for you and the council. And the reason I put that last piece in there was that one of the things that came up is that the council asked the manager to issue an RFP for the waste hauler, and he was very explicit in saying, I don't have the capacity to do that. If you give me that direction, I will of course follow through, but I'm going to need to have additional funding to do it. And he was pretty clear at the time that he was going to do that after free cash was certified, and which is what he did. And it was something that was directly addressed in town manager and council goals. So that's why I put in that last piece of it, which is needs identified after the JCPC process, and then to get beyond just that and address goals for you and the council.
Yeah, I like that, Andy. In response to Councilor Haneke's question about the source, whether it's a revenue versus an expenditure, I'm a little bit hesitant to try to do that because, an expenditure could be that we didn't fill positions that were open. And one would expect that in the budget the following year, those positions would still be open and expected to be filled. So, I mean, I don't know how to say what, if the expenses are lower, there could be all sorts of reasons why. And I don't know if we can specify what to do if you have that situation without a really, really long involved discussion. Bernie?
Yeah, you're right, Bob. The sources of free cash are going to vary from year to year to year to year. So to try to parse it out that this is where we've got free cash because our projections were low versus this is where we get free cash because of operational changes. It's just it's not a very productive exercise. Free cash is what you have at the end of the year. It gets certified, and as and I hope I didn't mistake myself. I understand that people go to Melissa and Paul go to the council to say this is what we got for free cash and this is how we intend to use it. If you guys approve, I understand that. I'm a little lost here as to why the extent of this discussion. Now, I understand there's some suspicion or some concern that we underestimate our revenues. And that may well be true until the day that we overestimate our revenues or something, something happens. The town's been very fortunate. We have not had a serious crime committed in the community that will require tons and tons of police extra overtime in the police department. We've not had any significant environmental disasters. We've not had floods. These are all kinds of things that can get in the way and interfere with the ordinary progress of a budget over the course of the year. So I guess where I'm going is there are guidelines, the town's finance guidelines that we followed forever about free cash and general stabilization. I think if you want to write into the manager's goals, something that would encourage him or require him to come back and talk to the council in certain ways that aren't occurring now, that's fine. But I really do think that we need to kind of move on. And the free cash discussion in trying to be precise with free cash is, I think, a wasted exercise. It's going to change. It's going to vary. And you can't tell what it's going to happen. You can, if we have had a run of free cash at the end of the year around 5%, that's because it's been dumb luck.
Councilor Haneke?
I can support Andy's added sentence at the end of that paragraph, the last paragraph before enterprise funds. I do still think we should eliminate the opioid settlement paragraph, which is that top one there. And then I know Andy, I said we should go back to the bullet points. I think I have some suggestions for the bullet points that might be within what Andy was thinking, but we should get his sentence in this section first.
Okay, so let me read the last sentence in its entirety, so because it all needs to make sense, and it adds on to the end. However, you may choose to allocate some end-of-year surplus funds to next year's capital budget to supplement cash capital spending through the JCPC process, probably should be without the comma, or to address needs for FY26 not identified when JCPC made its recommendations and the CIP was developed, or to address goals for you and the council.
Could you read that again? I think Melissa's struggling.
Not
to-
address when JCPC, not addressing the capital plan?
Well, it's an or because it's two different thoughts, but it's or to address needs for FY26 not identified when JCPC made its recommendations and the CIP was developed, or to address goals for you and the council.
Or, oh,
Now that's
recommendations, May's recommendations.
And
When?
the CIP.
And the CIP was developed, but at the beginning of this edition, address goals of the town manager as well as, your goals as well as the town council. At the beginning of this edition, you should say, or to address needs for FY26. Or to address needs for FY26.
So I said, or to address needs for FY26.
Right.
Who were not identified.
Not identified when Jason.
And I think that what we're trying to do is to limit it to two things. One is it has to be that it was something that JCPC had not considered, or CIP was, I mean, I guess we could play with that wording a little bit, but something having to do with the process. And then the second is to address goals that were not, again, not identified at the time the budget was developed.
Not identified or not addressed?
I think the goal is identified.
Because, I mean, wasn't the study identified, but was unable to be funded? That's the only reason I'm asking for the clarification, since we're
Which
for the goals of the town council and the town manager, or do I have the wrong section of the sentence?
So I think the sentence is meant to be the FY26 needs that weren't identified during the JCPC process, and that's separate from the accomplishing town council and town manager goals.
So not
two
and, but
distinct. I think they're two distinct clauses.
or to address like that?
yes.
Okay.
Everyone okay with this section now?
Might want to put in when the CIP.
When the CIP. No,
No. A little bit later in the same sentence.
Right. Okay.
when the CIP.
Right there.
Yeah.
Mhm.
All right. Anything on enterprise funds? Section 7. Pretty short section. Anything on section 8, other ways to support services in the budget? Any questions on section 9's conclusion? Okay, did we want to go back to the bullets, to the summary of budget recommendation bullets? Because I
Yeah.
think,
I have the suggested changes that I think will accomplish what Andy was going for in the budget surpluses section, which is on
okay,
page 2.
okay,
Okay.
So retitling it, budget surpluses included in certified free cash. Deleting the opioid settlement bullet
mhm,
and rewording the last bullet to read, well, we're adding to the end of it. So after next year's capital budget on that bullet, add, or for FY26 needs not identified during the JCPC process or to accomplish policy goals.
Oh,
I know
goodness.
it's not quite how it was worded below, but we're going for brevity here.
Okay, or needs,
To identify, or for FY26 needs not identified during the JCPC process or to accomplish policy goals.
oh geez. Or to what, policy goals?
Accomplish policy
Accomplish.
goals.
great.
And I think there needs to be a 4 before the FY26 FOR
Yep.
or for FY26 needs. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I agree.
These period bullets or no period bullets?
There are no
No
period.
period bullets.
Okay.
Okay, anybody else have any comments? Andy, are you good with these changes?
That's it for me.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so, I guess.
Can I
we're
make a
through.
motion?
Yep, go for it.
I move to recommend that council adopt the FY26 budget guidelines as amended at today's meeting.
Is there a second?
Yes. Second.
Okay. Any further discussion? I think Counselor Walker has left the meeting. We still have a quorum, but there's only 3 voters, plus Bernie. Okay, so let's start voting. I will vote aye. Counselor Haneke,
Aye.
Andy,
Aye.
Bernie,
I'm in support.
good. All right, so we are done. And Melissa, if you can send that to me, I will. I'll make all the changes, and then I also kept notes. I'll just double check that we got it, everything, and send it around to everybody. And also, I'll create a draft report for people to review before we send it on to the council. We're pretty late now, so I don't see that we're gonna. Do we need? I don't think we need another committee meeting this year. Do we?
We might need one for the capital projects financing model.
Yeah, because
Okay.
we haven't really gotten, we keep saying we're going to talk about that and we haven't done it. So I
right.
would suggest scheduling something, and because we can always cancel the meeting, but if we can pin everybody down now as do a date and time, it would be preferable.
In prior years, we've had one meeting scheduled after the first discussion of the guidelines, so that if amendments to the guidelines need to be made, that the committee can make them on behalf of the council. And it's a question, it's usually not long, but it's a question of making sure that everybody on the committee is in agreement with the wording for the amended, so that it keeps the council from having to get into the wording game during a meeting, one of its meetings.
Can we maybe try for next Tuesday?
I can do it next Tuesday. I don't know about Alicia. I'll ping her, see if she can make it. It might be like at 3, like we have today.
Yeah, that's open for me.
Okay. So 17th
At 3 p.m.
at 3 p.m. That work for you,
Yeah,
Andy?
don't leave out Kathy, but yes, it does.
Kathy, I don't know what she couldn't make today's meeting. I'll make sure she's pinged as well. I mean, she could make the 2 o'clock meeting, so I'm assuming she can make a 3 o'clock meeting.
So what do you want me to put on the agenda for this? What's the agenda for this?
Yeah, so the only thing that I think we need, I guess we should discuss, well, put the budget guidelines on just in case there is any amendment
Edits.
to them.
Okay.
And then we should maybe discuss the models? Make sense?
Okay.
Okay. Okay. All right. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So move.
Second.
All right. Any discussion? We'll vote. I vote aye. Andy,
Aye.
Bernie,
Port.
Counselor Haneke.
Bye.
All right. We're adjourned at 5:43 p.m. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for your hard work.